Welcome to Practice Growth, the podcast that combines business and wellness to help you do your very best as a therapist. Get ready to learn from seasoned clinicians about self-care, therapy, and running a business. Now, here's your host, Stephen Quinlan.
Hello, everyone. I am so excited to welcome you all to what is the very first episode of the Practice Growth podcast. If you've been listening in the past to the Anxious Child podcast, you've heard me detail how we are switching over into this new format, which I'm super excited to present to you today. The format, as you'll see, is more of a storytelling based format in that I have experienced clinicians come on and take us through their journey, both in terms of how they got to where they are today in managing their business, but also in terms of how they were developing just personally, not only professionally at that time. So I'm super excited to announce that today we have Dr. Cammy Froude. Dr. Cammy has a PhD in Human Development and Family Studies from the University of Connecticut. She's also a licensed marriage and family therapist. She has a ton of peer-reviewed publications that are out. She also recently just put out a book that is called Meditations, a guided journal for women. And it is mindfulness exercises to inspire their mindfulness practice. So I really enjoyed talking to Cammy today. I think you will see that she is super open about the struggles that she went through, not just in sort of bouncing around from different practices and trying to figure out exactly what it was that she wanted to do with herself professionally, but also she is a self-described recovering perfectionist who has a long history of anxiety and with just a dash of OCD. And she spent many years trying to quiet her mind and calm her body, and then eventually just worked towards healing herself, which of course informed the way that she now works and heals others. She is a San Francisco-based psychotherapist, and she has a flourishing practice that has just kind of taken off relatively recently, although part of what's interesting about her story is you'll hear all of the steps that she went through trying to prepare herself to do that. Perhaps you're wondering why it is that I'm doing this podcast. It takes a lot of time and a lot of effort to get this done. So why am I doing all this? The answer is I want to talk to people like you, and I want to help you get to a place that I am right now. And I remember so vividly what it was like for me, feeling underappreciated, way underpaid, and just totally burned out on the profession of psychotherapy. It doesn't have to be that way. I'm at a place now where I'm excited to go to work, and I feel this connection to my clients and the work that I'm doing that is just so reinvigorated. And I want to share that with you. I really believe passionately that we can make a difference in the world. And it just strikes me as a total tragedy that we're burned out for reasons of either not managing our business properly or not taking care of ourselves properly. So that's what this is all about. If you'd like to learn more, you can check out the website, which is growingthepractice.com. And I've got several offerings there that I'm hopeful will be really helpful for you. There's free stuff for you to check out there as well, just to kind of get the ball rolling for you and help you start to visualize how your practice and really your whole world can be different. So check it out. Without further ado, here is the interview with me and Dr. Cammy Froude. Enjoy. Thank you so much for being here. It's lovely to meet you. I'm really excited to talk to you. I know you're doing a lot of different stuff right now. You've got this book coming out and you're doing coaching and therapy at the same time. So I'd love to hear about all that, but I thought maybe we could start kind of back at the beginning, as it were, and you can tell me a little bit about kind of how you got into the work and what things were like for you kind of early in your career.
Yeah, Stephen, thank you for going back to the foundation. It's funny, I haven't thought about that in a long time, and I started to.
Uh-huh.
And I'm glad that I thought about this a little bit before, because it's not, when we're in that like middle part of our career,
Yeah.
we are just like going, 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 going. And
Uh-huh.
so the opportunity for reflection was so welcomed.
Mm.
And it's funny because when I thought all the way back, and this is probably not what you were, like I'll talk about the career part too.
That's okay. As far back as you want to go.
I know, it's like,
Yeah.
so when I was in the womb, no.
Yes.
um that when I was really little, I went to a school and like K through 2,
Uh-huh.
and they did the timeout chair.
Uh-huh.
But what they did that was so beautiful is they let a helper go to the chair with you.
Were
And
you this helper perhaps
yes.
going along? Okay.
And don't get me wrong, I was no angel. So I was in the timeout chair with the helper as much as I was the helper.
Okay.
But all the way back then, no one really wanted to be the helper because the kids had to go in the timeout chair during recess. But I enjoyed being that helper, sitting with somebody when they were basically had committed some kindergarten-esque infraction.
Uh-huh.
And just like being with them essentially during their time of reflection.
Mm.
And it's funny because when I thought all the way back there, something that I think I really liked about it was that it was a structured area. And this is something that sort of threads throughout my career. People, when I was little, I had some pretty significant anxiety. And it was often when people were asking me for help in a way that was just catch as catch can. And I would get kind of overwhelmed. And so I was thinking back to this timeout chair, and I'm like, I wonder why that was so, like why I gravitated toward that role. Okay, I was helping. It was structured. There was a definite beginning and end. Okay, I'm seeing the picture here. Yes.
I saw you are a self-described recovering perfectionist. So I'm imagining that's where some of this is going with the structure and the anxiety and etc.
Yes. I think a lot of many people, therapists who I've talked to, and I'm also a supervisor. So I do supervision with therapists too. A lot of times in childhood, we were the helpers. And I think sometimes when we can look back on the way that we helped when we were just doing it organically, it can give us some signs of, oh, maybe this is why I gravitate toward this therapy approach, or maybe this is why I tend to lean this way with clients. So yes, that was my very first draw just toward basically helping. And then had probably similar to, just as a question, is your origin story also super young, or is it later?
I'd say mine's probably a little bit more kind of like adolescence, where I also probably would have spent some time in the timeout chair. Maybe more sort of proverbial at that point, but that I got a sense of that this was what I liked to do. That it came into. Actually, it was partially, I think, because I went to therapy at that point, and I was kind of like, wow, this is really interesting. There's something here, and just kind of blossomed out from there.
I had forgotten that about, I don't know why. I had a therapist who I met with from 14 to 26.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
Isn't that wild?
Yeah.
I love her dearly. And it's so interesting because we worked together for a long time, and the boundaries still remained there.
Yeah.
It's not like we morphed into like some friendship or, anything like that. It was like a therapeutic relationship for that long. I just say that because I hear a lot of stories when you're in a therapy relationship for a decade plus, sometimes it can morph into something else. Wouldn't want to condone that one way or the other.
Right.
Just what I've heard.
Yep.
But that was a really big part of my story too, is meeting with a therapist in my adolescence, and early adulthood, and seeing her as Both someone who was helping me with anxiety and some OCD, and also someone who was living a life that I could envision myself emulating.
Yeah, I had that same thought. I
Mhm.
was like, oh, this is so cool. Like you're kind of, wow, you have this nice office
Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah,
like,
yeah,
and you just sort of sit here and you talk to people and you get to, you get to really help them. And there was something so profoundly appealing about that.
yeah.
And I mean, you hear this a lot too, around people who have that. Um, if you interface with somebody who is a helper and is, healing you in some way, that I think a part of you almost wants to continue that process. And like, and this gets a little dicey here too, as far as like therapeutic boundaries, et cetera. But you're also, you get to continually work on yourself, and you should do that as part of being a conscientious practitioner. um, but the fact that that's actually part of your job to do that, I just thought was so appealing and cool.
Mhm,
um,
mhm.
so tell me about so as you are a recovering
Yeah.
perfectionist, how did you start to grow through that, I guess, personally and maybe professionally, if that started to come into play at that point, and
Yes.
what did that look like?
Mhm. Well, I was definitely, a consummate student.
Mhm.
And throughout my, early childhood, middle school, high school, definitely looked for that external validation through tests and teachers' comments and acceptance from my school community.
Mhm.
And I do think many therapists who go, and obviously you have to get a master's degree to practice psychotherapy, but people who go through that process and also then and go on to their PhD or fellowships, there is a pull toward the external approval.
Mm. Mhm.
And when kept in check, it can be used for your advantage, right?
Uh-huh.
Like you get the external approval, it feeds you inside, but you have a steady core, and then you can leverage that for your own personal growth and development.
Uh-huh.
I think when too much of your core sense of self, and this was me for a portion of my life, is connected to external approval, you end up rapidly accelerating the life of others. Right,
Uh-huh.
through your
Yeah.
own due diligence, through your own writing, through your own, desire to please.
Mm.
You're suddenly pushing other people's lives forward pretty rapidly.
Mhm.
And then you're there thinking, okay, what's left beyond someone's praise and approval,
Mm.
or getting another award or securing another degree.
Mm.
The more I think self-actualized we become, those
Mhm.
external things they get more and more hollow.
Mm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, and there's kind of a potentially a parallel process there of like getting these accolades, sort of advancing yourself professionally, and hopefully also advancing yourself kind of personally, um, because if it's like many other things, there's a balancing act there, and if you're too heavily focused on just those accolades, as you said, it's almost like being really wealthy, just monetarily. You kind of look around and you're like, well, why do I still feel this way? What's the point of all this?
Yes, so definitely, and I share this story publicly and with clients, and that rock, I would say, with like a self-worth rock bottom hit
Mm.
when I
Mhm.
got the highest
Mm.
degree I could get,
Mm.
and yet was still feeling not good enough.
Mm.
And that's just the cognitive dissonance that propelled me into really thinking, okay, I need to figure this out, because I
Mm.
can't keep looking externally to get this validation through papers and degrees and feedback from professors. It just didn't work. And that was actually the point where I decided that I wasn't going to pursue academia, that I was going to go into clinical work full time, because I just really believed intuitively that academia I was going to be pushing against a tidal wave of the need for external praise to get ahead. And that if I could center in my clinical work, in the timeout chair, 5-year-old me, that I could have a pure sense of purpose that I could connect to every single day. And that was a great decision.
Yes.
I'm really happy that I did that.
So to be clear, at that point, you had gotten your PhD, and you were initially planning to just teach or do research or something along those lines?
Yes. I was accepted into a combined master's and PhD program. And so what I was thinking of doing was just getting my master's and go ahead and getting the PhD and then going into a tenure track position. But something continued to whisper to me again, intuition. When I finished my master's, I actually did all my hours while I was getting my PhD and secured my license. So I was doing community mental health for 2 years. I listened to the podcast with you and your friend.
Oh, yeah.
It sounds like a very similar environment.
What a surprise.
Yeah, it's very similar environment. I was working full time with a caseload of, I was in a PhD program full time and then working full time with a caseload of probably 35 to 45 people in a really oppressed area. And it's a little scary when you're on 2 tracks. Working 80 hours a week and neither of them are going to be your final destination.
Oh my gosh.
So I'm like, okay, this is not working. Seeing 40 people in community mental health where I was burning out. I had no systemic support. And then I was in this full-time PhD program and I knew I can't do this tenure track. This isn't going to work.
Wow. So all those things are kind of coming together at that point. And you're like, I've got to do something different. I've got to change in some way. There's 2 things that I heard that that really kind of resonate with me. One is that you had to get to that place of, you hear the rock bottom kind of thrown around a lot. It means different things to different people, but essentially it's just that it feels like intolerable, so that something has to change, and there's so much that kind of comes out of that. I think of like a lotus flower or something, right, where it's like that, it grows out of the muck, right, and it's this beautiful thing. So that, and also that the whisper that you described, I love that, because it's so hard to hear sometimes, but it's like that's the intuition, that's the gut feeling that if ignored, you ignore it at your peril, I guess.
I think so.
Yeah.
And one thing I know, being a trauma therapist, somatic based, body oriented therapist, if you ignore it, don't worry, it will emerge again.
That's right.
It will talk again.
He'll be back.
Yes, it will. The whisper that we can ignore will continue to get louder and louder until we can't ignore it. I will also say about the whisper that I think is really important for people who are listening is that it gets louder when you have some community of people who know your intrinsic values and know your worth.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so I have been so grateful, fortunate to have mentors from middle school. who have stuck with me. One being my therapist, who I was with for a long, long time. We actually have drifted off, and I think that's okay right now. But during those formative years, she was definitely a big part of that. I had a middle school teacher who I kept in touch with through today, two middle school teachers. And when I would share my discontent, they would just come back to me with a reflection of my values. Cammy, we know you love to help people. We know you are fortuitous. We know you are strong. We know you complete things. You're going to be okay. You are going to be just fine. And so I think when you have the whisper and you say it to your community, they say it louder back in a different way.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the beauty of things like, I think, mastermind groups or supervision groups, peer supervision groups, I mean, all of these things where you're surrounded by, like-minded individuals who can reflect that back for you with the support. Because the other thing that can happen sometimes with that, the whisper and the impulse to sort of do something else, is that it's very easy for another part of your brain to come in and be like, well, that's never going to work. There's no way. Or you're, you have to kind of gut this out and keep doing what you're doing. So tell me what happened after. So you're, the 80 hours a week, I'm imagining you like trying to hold it down with like your PhD on the one side and then working in the community mental health on the other side. What happened from there? You stuck it out, I guess, for the 2 years at community mental health?
Yes, I did. I think, I've thought a lot. I was raised very much in a family and a community of like don't quit. And I've had to unlearn some of that and also keep some of it too. And so I think a really important question to always ask is, what doors am I closing when I quit? What doors would be opened if I quit? And then vice versa. If I stay, what doors are opened? What doors are closed? And at that point, I felt like I wanted to get my license to practice therapy. That seemed like a door I did not want to close. And I was also learning, even though I didn't want to go tenure track, I was learning so much and it was so exciting. And so I didn't want to close that door either. And so I'm like, okay, well, we're gutting it out. And we're just going to do this. Fortunately, I had about at that point 10 years of therapy under my own belt. So I had a robust set of coping skills and a really good support system. I'm not sure if I would have made the same decision if I hadn't had 10 years of therapy before then, but I had the tools to be able to move through, decided to do that. And then when I graduated and really it was like, okay, I'm not going to do tenure track. I already know that's not a path that's going to be conducive for me. And I just want to say, I also greatly admire individuals who do go the tenure track professorial route and are able to maintain their core sense of self, confidence, and grounding. It is really hard. And so I have utmost admiration for those people, and also knew that I wanted to do the clinical track. So then I'm thinking, okay, so I know CBT, I felt confident in doing cognitive behavioral therapy, dialectical behavioral therapy. I loved meeting with clients, building relationships, and also many of my clients were not getting better. And so I thought, well, if I'm going to go this clinical route, I want to do it well. And I can't have an outcome of like 60% of people who get better. That just wasn't going to work. And so for me, at least, and so I was thinking, what's the missing component? And it was the body, because so many of my clients were having stomach aches, chronic pain, that whole somatic thread. And I was able to connect with Randall Wrights, who is one of the leaders in medical family therapy. He has a medical family therapy fellowship, and I was accepted to that program.
Tell me more about what that means, because I was going to ask you about that when I saw you did your postdoc fellowship there. And what is that? What is medical family therapy? Is it just something that sort of tries to deal with those somatic issues or physical issues?
So I would say at the widest lens, medical family therapy facilitates the connection between the mental health systems of care and the medical systems of care. So like at the broadest level, medical family therapy agendas would look at what does an EHR look like in a hospital, an electronic health record? Where are the mental health records? Sometimes we have to break the glass, right, to get to a mental health record. Is that facilitative of client care? Does it stigmatize mental health too much? Should it be integrated? So that's just one example. Like that's a process-oriented institutional goal, for example, of medical family therapy, to really look at some of the systems in medicine and examine, analyze, and contribute to their efficacy for people healing from mental health in medical settings.
I see.
Then just kind of down a level. So that's just more like systems and processes for systems. And then down a level in institutions, medical family therapists are wanting to become embedded and are embedded into medical facilities. So when you go, the places where, let me give an example, the places where it's very much taken for granted, like oncology, usually there's a social worker.
A social worker, yeah.
Right. And also your friend was talking about this.
Yeah, Peter, yep.
Yeah,
so the narrative medicine stuff, yeah.
Exactly. I thought that whole conversation was so funny about defining narrative medicine.
Yeah, right.
Right.
It was a good, yeah.
Yeah. So like oncology naturally will integrate. Well, of course, someone's dealing with all this stuff. We're going to have a social worker. Same thing, like pediatric wings of hospitals.
Yeah.
They have sometimes they even have like lifespan support team. They have a social worker. They'll bring in music therapists. So those parts of medicine, they're naturally conducive to a interprofessional landscape. And so medical family therapists are trying to broaden that a little bit into primary care predominantly. And so the fellowship with Randall Wrights through the St. Mary's Family Medicine Residency, it's a primary care clinic, a teaching clinic. And he had a fellowship where he would integrate family therapists into the daily machinations of a busy primary care clinic.
Okay.
So like the whole team would come together in the morning in what's called a huddle, which is a common language for medicine. Like the team huddles in the morning, and then as you're going through the cases, the doctors will say, hey, this person has cardiovascular disease and they also have anxiety. Cammy, could you come in and join this session with me, this appointment with me? I'm going to talk about the cardiovascular disease. I'd like for you to talk about the way that anxiety can precipitate, exacerbate, and also assist in healing. When the anxiety is in check, it can actually facilitate the healing of cardiovascular disease. And when it's not in check, it can proliferate it. So that is a bit about medical family therapy.
Okay. So you got this fellowship and did the training, and once you started to incorporate that into your work, you mentioned that you wanted to, you felt like not enough of your clients were getting better. Once you started to incorporate this into your work, what happened then?
more of them started to get better.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
I
like,
thought you
so,
were going in that direction.
yeah, no, totally. I mean, but the
Uh-huh.
thing is that maybe you wouldn't have been. So
That-
I feel like I've always been on this pursuit of just learning more to decrease that percentage of clients who report to me, I loved you, Cammy. You were great. I'd love to go out for coffee with you, but I don't feel much better.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm glad that people enjoy being with me, but
Mm-hmm.
my job is to help people get better
Mm-hmm.
and then to move on. And so I've been on this quest to reduce that number as much as possible. So yes, that was extraordinarily helpful. And I was really excited because I thought, okay, I moved to me, it was a very random, like I'm Boston, Massachusetts through and through. I was born and raised there. And so to go to Colorado, to Grand Junction, I mean, it felt like a sacrifice.
Yeah.
Although being there was gorgeous.
Yeah, I was going to say, I've been there, but in the opposite direction. I know
Yeah.
what that feels like.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm curious, like, so when you started to integrate this into your work and people started to get better, did you then, and it's just side note, it's interesting that it's this random thing, because I feel like so often that's the case, that you're like, well, I just sort of happened upon this thing. And then the next thing I knew, it was like this integral part of my work, or something that I really wanted to like have as a niche kind of area for me to work in.
Mhm.
When that started to happen, that people were kind of were getting better, and did that sort of inform a decision for you to like really narrow down your work into this area and become very kind of specific with that?
Yeah, so another huge part of the training program it was actually more like 30% patient care and 70% resident education. And so the fellowship was really training you in how to train doctors and how to support doctors in their
Like
address.
with mental health, like talking to them about how to talk to
Yes.
people about mental health. Okay.
Yeah. Because most of these doctors were going into very rural parts of Colorado where they would not have a behaviorist. And so we were trying to teach them, like, how could you do truly integrated holistic care in a 20-minute session, a 20-minute medical appointment when you go off to, rural western slope of Colorado.
Yeah. How do the doctors respond to that? You telling them what to do?
So this is like so inextricably tied to the next part of the story.
Okay.
So I loved doing it. The doctors were very responsive.
Okay.
I had Randall Wrights, who was a phenomenal mentor. It was a really functional hospital system where people generally it was also a totally different culture. Like your client could be your hairdresser, and it had to be, and so I was thinking, like, this is amazing, right? Like, I'm teaching, I'm seeing clients 30% of the time in the context of this clinic. There was opportunities to write and opportunities to present. So I just thought, I'm going to do medical family therapy and resident education. This is like where my life path is going to go. The money was also appropriate. Okay.
It's better than inappropriate, which is often
but that
the case.
would be the common thing in our field.
Yeah, right.
So it was really great. And so, this is the sad part of the story.
Oh, it's okay.
I know. So, it is just like, to listeners, I think it's just that elation when you feel like, I've got it. This is the thing I've been waiting for. So it's like true love in your professional life.
Yeah.
And then you find out your true love in your professional life is a cheating bastard.
Oh no.
No. So
you saw a text message from your
so I ended up being recruited by a really well-known large medical center here in California, and they were beginning a residency, and they asked me to co-lead their behavioral health curriculum, like from start.
Okay.
They were willing to fund me for a fellowship at UCSF to become a medical. The fellowship was around medical education. So like getting a fellowship in how to train doctors. So it was just like this perfect, amazing package culmination of everything that I had been working toward. And I got there, and for a whole, confluence of reasons, realized that I had inadvertently sort of landed myself back in academia vis-a-vis a clinical role, but I was still back in academia where there was a tremendous amount of politics, a lot of red tape. And I was also young and really didn't have the knowledge, acumen, delicacy to navigate the politics of that role.
Yeah.
And got pretty pummeled by the political machinations of a really large system.
Pummeled in like a bureaucratic sense, like you were just like weighed down under red tape and paperwork, or literally by like, well, not literally, but sort of figuratively by other staff or something that were there? Or what did that look like for you?
It was, there's like a modus operandi for working in large systems and understanding hierarchy, respecting hierarchy, navigating hierarchy, that I was both unaware of and also not respectful of, because even now I think it's bogus.
Yeah.
But also, like, I would say advise, younger professionals, or if you recognize that when you go into a larger system and your goal is to change it, and you're one person and you're the only non-MD, or you're the youngest, or you're just know that will present challenges.
Yeah. It's so easy to picture, and I've had some sense of this myself, being in organizations where there are set ways of doing things, and you may have ideas about how you want things to work, but getting that actually implemented can feel next to impossible. I mean, I remember being like, could we please, you mentioned EHRs earlier, remember being like, could we please get some kind of, I'm handwriting my notes, like, this is ridiculous. It's the, confidentiality is really bad. And it was, well, no, this is how we've always kind of done things. And it's very easy to feel stuck in that situation because of what you're up against. It just feels like this immovable kind of behemoth of, that's how things are done. And it almost feels like your parents talking to you or something, like, that's how things are done, now off to bed. Wow, that's so unfortunate. So you landed in this spot, you had those feelings, and what happened from there?
That was one of those moments where I tried really, 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 really hard to change so much about myself and how I engaged. And I think it was one of those things where it was like right place, wrong time. Like even now, I think if I were placed in that job, I would struggle. But maybe if I was 50, I could do it. It's one of those things where there's always pros and cons to every job. And I think your pros and cons list has to match where you are in your life.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so when I was in my, late 20s, I was just like, I want to go. I want to build programs. I want to keep things moving. I want to help people. I want to see as many people as possible. I want to train. I want to read. I want to learn.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're in a large bureaucracy, they actually create systems to slow people down. Mm-hmm. Because for good reason, mm-hmm. because they want policies and procedures. They want, so my phase of development was not matched to the job that I was in. Uh-huh. So I would say that. And I think slowly but surely I started realizing, okay, Cammy, this is one of those times where you could just save your head and stop. You will break the brick wall eventually, uh-huh. but you might also have no capacity to think anymore. Right. So just stop, uh-huh. stop banging the brick wall. It's uh-huh. okay. Mm-hmm. And, I don't fault that system. I think systems, we have to just know what we're dealing with when we're going into systems and figure mm-hmm. out, is this the game I want to play in mm-hmm. my professional life? Okay. And some people just like, I'm going to go into a big system and the game I want to play is navigating that system and becoming the director of mental health for the whole system.
Right.
Well, and it's like, hey, more power to you.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to know yourself, because if that is, as you, I think, really eloquently are putting, if your personal alignment is not there with what it is that you're doing, be that in a big organization or wherever, there's that dissonance there, and being aware of that, being in tune mm-hmm. with that is what really will help kind of lead you forward from that point.
Definitely. Yes.
Okay. So you recognize that you were like, I'm not, this is not working out for me. And what did you do from there?
We're almost to the end, so this is great. Okay, we're almost to present day.
All right, good, because I want to hear all the amazing stuff that you're doing now. So
yes, we're almost there. So then, and I just want to say to people listening, sometimes you have to hibernate a little bit after a really difficult professional loss. And I'm just that happened like multiple years ago, and I'm still getting emotional about it because it's difficult to say, again, like that external, I'm not doing this anymore. That external praise wasn't there, but you knew it was the right thing for yourself. And so I went and became a high school counselor.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Because I just thought I have to get back with a group of clinicians. And I want to be far enough down the hierarchy where I don't have to engage with politics, because at that point they terrified me. Uh-huh. I was just terrified. Yeah. And so I was a high school counselor in a high school right outside of San Francisco, completely outside of my scope of practice. Outside of my training. I mean, it was fine for me to do it. I wasn't even using my LMFT. I was counseling high school students on their, college, how to navigate their courses. And and so I will just say for like the listeners, that was a way to come back to baseline. I knew it was like, who are the most selfless people, right? Like in the high school counselors, teachers. And I surrounded myself with them and supported their team. That was not my mission in life. And so I went into a group of people who that is their mission. And I'm just like, I need you to help me heal, and I will also contribute to your mission.
I was just thinking that it sounds very much like, and we were sort of talking about trauma a little bit earlier, and I know it's something that you work a great deal with now, but it sounds very much like you had to go back into this like healing place for you. Yeah. Like you had to almost like an opposite sort of direction. in order to kind of, as you said, come back to baseline, come back to sort of yourself in some way?
And it was okay. I had a lot of questions from my, curiosities
Sure.
from my
Friends and
PhD
family.
friends, family,
Yeah.
PhD professors who are just like, what are you doing? What's going on? This is not what we trained you to be doing, and I have learned through being a somatic-based therapist is to follow what feels congruent physically, spiritually, emotionally. And when it starts to feel like avoidance, you got to move on. And so I was in tune to that. I stayed there for just about 2.5 years.
Okay.
And around year 2, I was thinking, okay, I think I know what's happening. I do not want to be enmeshed in large corporate politics. That's not the game that I want to play in my life. Although I also very much admire mental health professionals who are like the director of mental health for a hospital system. The skills that they have are like the way they can navigate is amazing.
Yep.
It was just not the game I wanted to play in my professional life. I loved writing, research, knew I didn't want to do academia, loved meeting with people, knew I didn't want to do community mental health, also didn't want to be on the lowest part of an educational hierarchy, doing phenomenal work, and also not having wider impacts around policy and procedure and community-based work. So I thought, okay, Cammy, why don't you just start doing something on your own?
Well, tell me about that decision, because that I feel like is such a difficult one. And again, one I've been through myself, and that feels very much like you're just jumping off a cliff.
Oh my God.
But you've been supported in some ways, supported and held by these organizations.
Totally.
Like, even though that there might be dysfunction or bureaucracy, blah, 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 but to leave the security of that, leave the consistency of your paycheck and your retirement fund and your insurance and all these things, and to just jump off. How did you get to that place, and like how were you able to do that?
So Stephen, just tell me, how long have you been in private practice?
About 8, 9, coming up on 9 years. Yeah.
Okay, so you're way ahead of me. So I've been this is my very so starting August, just 6 months ago.
Yeah.
This is my full-time health, like insurance. There's no connection to an institution.
Oh, so you've really just, this is like, oh my gosh, wow.
But so for the 2 years before then, I was creating the foundation.
Yeah.
So
creating the foundation in terms of, tell me what you mean by that. Were you doing stuff on the side, or like, what did that look like?
So I said I was recovering. So, for me, a really big, you could either identify it as a goal or as a fear, are finances.
Yeah, absolutely.
I want to, being financially sound and having enough money to live. I live in the single most expensive city in the country. I live in San Francisco, and we live in the city. I was really committed to, I didn't want family financial support as an adult. And so so when I decided to go to my private practice, the very first thing I did, and again, this is not a prescription for people, it's just what I did.
Yeah, it's your experience. Yeah.
I met with my husband and a financial advisor. And we worked backwards from retirement. And also, if we continued to elevate our standard of living, which we wanted to do, how much would I need to make a month, and how much would I need to grow in order to be a meaningful contributor to my home and to my future? I got that number,
Mhm.
and realized, okay, I'm glad I have my job at the school because
Uh-huh.
it's going to take me some time to figure out how I'm going to make this dollar amount in
Mhm.
private practice.
Mhm.
And so so then again, recovering perfectionist,
Mhm.
I wanted to be really clear about what kind of business I wanted to open. And so I took a portion, maybe like 20% of my school income.
Mhm.
And I like, it wasn't a lot actually. I mean, it
Mhm.
was maybe $1,000. I
Mhm.
hired a lawyer to just go through what kind of business should I open based on
Mhm.
the growth that I wanted.
Okay.
Ultimately landed that I wanted to open an S corp.
Uh-huh.
And then I opened it. So worked with again like a lawyer and an accountant and opened an S corp. And then got my consent forms.
Mhm.
Felt really good about what needed to be in there and what didn't. Learned random things like the BBS could, suspend your license if you have one thing wrong in your advertising.
Mhm.
It's like
Mhm.
so particular in California.
These are all the
Uh,
things that I think freak people out too. Do you know what I
but
mean?
so they
Yeah.
freaked me out.
Right. Right. Although can be, and I'm thinking back to what you were saying around anxiety and the people who, have the cardiac issues, that like there is a positive side to anxiety.
Totally, yeah.
Which I remember very clearly when I was starting out in that. And I had another colleague say to me, I suggest that you just accept that you're anxious
Yeah,
and also know that with that, you can be really productive,
totally.
which you kind of have to be because there are all these little things that you have to figure out.
I in the beginning, and my therapist was very much CBT and exposure therapy.
Mhm.
That's how I was able to recover from OCD and anxiety.
Mhm.
And I just went back to what I would do with her. So every single night when I was starting my business, I would write down every single thing that was worrying me.
Mhm.
And then the next few days, I would get the answers.
Mhm.
And I just
Like
kept doing it. Yeah.
like in a like almost like a manifesting sort of way, like they would just come around, or you would actually go out and seek the answers, or both?
Yes. No, 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 no. Like, I mean, for me, I was always worried about things I didn't know I didn't know.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
So I would write down, like, I would write down, I'm scared about missing something on the consent form. How do I know that I have everything I need?
Mm-hmm.
The second question would be, I'm nervous that there's something I'm going to miss and I don't even know to look for it. So then the next day, maybe I would call the Board of Behavioral Sciences and ask, where can I find in writing everything I need in the consent form? And then I sort of made a promise to myself that I would no longer worry about that because I answered it.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second thing, how do I stop worrying about things that I don't know? I don't know.
Uh-huh.
I called the lawyer and said, I'm worried about missing something I don't know. I don't know. Is
Uh-huh.
that something you do?
Uh-huh.
Yes, that's my job, Cammy.
Yes.
And I was like, oh, I didn't know that. So
Yeah.
then I could sort of stop worrying.
Right.
So I would say for 2 years. Now, granted, everybody who's listening to this, I have a history of anxiety and OCD. And so
Mm-hmm.
I did things very much proactively,
Mm-hmm.
slowly,
Mm-hmm.
and everybody doesn't have to do that. It's just what worked for me. So for 2 years, I built the foundation.
Uh-huh.
I learned how to market.
Uh-huh.
I took on probably 10 clients.
Okay.
And then with those 10 clients, I funneled more into marketing, more into learning, then got 20.
Uh-huh.
And then finally left the school in August because I had met that in monthly income
The
threshold
number.
that the tax person had told us we need.
Mm-hmm. Well, it is. I mean, I appreciate that you're saying that it is an individualized process for everybody,
Totally.
and everybody goes about it in the way that they're going to go about it. But
Yes.
I think there's so much that you can learn from the way that you went about it. And if that applies to you, great. If not, then that's fine.
Hmm.
But like the the way that you were able to kind of keep your foot in that stability being at the high school, and
Yes.
then while you're there, kind of carefully planning everything out, really
Yes.
taking your time, because you
Yes.
know yourself and you know that's going to work well for you.
Yes.
And also, I love that you were able to outsource some of that worry to the lawyer who's like, this is what I do. I mean, I'm a lawyer, like this is
Yeah.
my job. And so you can just kind of like um mentally and literally leave that with them.
I also just want to say people, I think, get freaked out with lawyer bills.
Yeah.
If it's appropriate for this show, I'm happy to put the company that I use who provides me legal counsel. They're extremely affordable and they actually operate on a monthly fee as opposed to like a $10,000 retainer.
Oh yeah, that's
So
great.
you don't have to have a big chunk of money to get legal consult, and you do not have to call LegalZoom. You can have your own legal lawyer with a monthly fee as opposed to having to put down a big chunk of money.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I do think that even that word, people freak out
Yeah.
for a variety of reasons, and a big one of them is financial.
Mhm.
Because we all think, oh gosh, will they make this much an hour? Or I've heard about retainers, and what does that mean? And like, but it doesn't have to be that way. And I'm sure you would say that that money that you spent early on was 100% worth it.
So worth it, because whenever I would say, just like we advise our clients to have a healthcare team
Mhm.
before they start really intense therapy, like, you should have a best friend or community group, or we need that before we start a private practice.
Mhm.
I would suggest, or at least in the early stages, like securing a really competent tax person, a
Yes.
really competent lawyer, a really competent bookkeeper if you're not great with bookkeeping.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
Mhm,
And again, it's back to knowing what you're good at, right? Like if
mhm,
you're somebody who is maybe naturally sort of an accountant or something,
mhm.
then, and you like
Yeah.
that, and
Mhm,
that doesn't sap you of energy in that way, knock yourself out, then
mhm.
you can take care of that. But if it's outside of your wheelhouse, just outsource 100%.
Totally. The
Yeah.
other thing that was very helpful for me, and again, recovering perfectionist,
Mhm.
is I wanted to test all of my systems with one client. And so I just started with one client and tested everything with them.
Mm.
Like, what would the intake phone call look like? What would my paperwork look like? And
Mhm.
ironed out a lot of the crinkles,
Mhm. Mhm.
and then just continued to replicate. So now by the time I'm currently, I guess I'm now 3 years in,
Mhm.
everything is automated because it was just done kind of carefully
Right.
throughout.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Your own systems in place,
totally.
like what works for you. Yeah.
I do want to say one more thing, and I know we're probably running out of time.
No, you're
Let
fine.
me just share one more thing
Yeah.
is I think one of the most important things, in addition to just having your seminal mentor community,
Uh-huh.
and then building your private practice community,
Mhm.
lawyer, tax, bookkeeper, is also having a really keen sales and marketing
Mm.
person,
Mhm.
whether that be a friend, whether that be a mentor, whether it be a YouTube channel. I have learned more about sales and marketing than I ever could have imagined. And it took me years
Mhm.
to find those people, because in the therapy community, some people purport
Mhm.
to have that knowledge,
Mhm.
but it's tangential.
Mhm.
When
Yeah.
you go to like the sales and digital marketing community, it is wild what they're
It is
doing.
wild. Yes. And so much of that, again, that money and that like investment, when I think back to when I was sort of first starting out, I was so terrified. I was like, I have to keep my overhead at just like
So
nothing.
low.
Like I was
I
like,
know.
I
I
am
know.
gonna pay like the smallest amount for rent. And
Uh-huh.
like that's it. Like I'm not doing
Uh-huh.
anything else. Like, no way. But now it's like, having done sort of worked with various, business coaches, et cetera, myself, I just see the value in that. It's so
Totally.
huge, even though if you're looking at what that initial investment might be, and you kind of, you're like, oh, you kind of tense up a little bit, like, oh, that feels like a lot. It's just like your lawyer, and that it pays back for itself, over and over again, and you
You
don't regret it.
You can totally, and I think it's important for listeners to know, mm, I didn't have any financial platform going in. So
Mhm.
when I didn't invest any money into my business until I had money coming in.
Yeah.
So like my first consent form, I did do it. I took another consent form from a
Yeah.
therapist.
Yeah. Mhm.
And I just said to myself, oh, that's why I had the school job. I'm like, okay, my first client, my first $1,000 coming from my first client,
Uh-huh.
I'm going to get a lawyer to look at my consent forms.
Uh-huh.
Then my second client, all right, my next $1,000, I'm
Mhm.
going to secure a bookkeeper.
Mhm.
And then, and you just continue to grow little by little.
Mhm.
And you really don't have to have any money to start, especially a telehealth business.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's different now than it used to be, but that's an important point too, is that so much of the progress is incremental, and I think this misconception that you kind of like hang the shingle outside your door and we're in business and like off you go. Um,
Yeah.
but what's so great about your story is that like that continual progress that you just like when you were in that place that felt like safe for you, and you were chipping away at this other thing and slowly kind of building it. And I think that's often what it looks like. Um, so how did you get the idea for, I'm curious about a couple more things.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
um, and I don't want to hold you if you've
No,
got to be somewhere or something.
I'm good. I'm
Okay,
good.
but so I'm curious about your writing of the book and
Yes.
how that came about.
Mhm.
And well, I'll just start with that. I have another question, but tell me about that.
So, this was very interesting. Uh, I love writing. I'm a
Mhm.
prolific writer. And also, anytime I ever had a question, when I would go look for the answer, it was there. And so someone else had written about it. And
Mhm.
so I would never felt compelled to write anything, really, because, I only want to write about something that needs to be written about.
Mhm.
And so that was never something that had emerged for me. I got an email from this very, and people can look it up and Google it, this very interesting publishing house. We don't have to go into all the details, but readers should know, listeners, I guess, should know that, there's like Random House way at the top,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
then you have like your middle presses, and then you have like your self-publishing process. So I would say this publishing house is somewhere in between middle, closer to middle, but a little bit towards self-publishing,
Mhm.
in that bracket. And the only reason I say that is because I learned that to get at this super top tier publishing house, you have to have a giant audience and a giant following as
Yep.
a prerequisite. You knew that? I didn't know.
Yeah, I found that out myself when I was writing a book. So yeah, I get it. Yeah.
Yes. And so this publishing house reached out to me, and they do what's called like a, it's sort of interesting to me.
Yeah.
They look to see what people are Google searching.
Mm.
And then and they have an article written about this, so you can look it up. And then they solicit authors to write about what the exact need is in that moment.
Oh, interesting.
And so their publishing requirements are really quick. The authors do not make a royalty. We're paid a flat fee to write the book.
Mm.
And I personally did it because I wanted to write for the first time for
Mm.
somebody and see how that process went. And I also loved the book that they pitched for me, which was exactly related to my audience. Meditations, a guided journal for women.
Yeah, which I was also very interested in that, because I'm curious what the format of that looks like.
Yeah,
Is it
it's
some
here.
Okay, so what does it look like? You sort of you go through, is it a daily kind of thing?
Yeah, so this publishing house is interesting too because they give you an outline and allow you to have some creativity within the outline. And so learning from my own clients, I decided to structure the book in the context of the 6 universal emotions: sadness, fear, anger, happiness, surprise, and disgust.
Mm.
And so what I wanted people to do is when they feel an emotion that's distressing, for them to be able to go to that section of the book and have a series of exercises. So there's 5-minute meditation prompts, and then there's also journal prompts to pull them out of that somatic and spiritual emotional state and bring them to a place that they prefer.
Okay.
So that's how the book is structured. There's mindful meditations, there's prompts, and then there's affirmations.
I love it.
Yeah.
That's great. My other question is, so because you do, you have your therapy side of your practice, and then you also have this coaching side of your practice.
Yes.
Tell me about how you decided that and what that has been like.
I have definitely learned that this can be sort of a touchy topic among therapy circles. I didn't know that. I have learned that through some of the online platforms that I'm on. And so I'm just, I hope your listeners are open. So I had an issue where some of my clients were no longer meeting DSM-5 criteria.
Yeah.
And this was just in my own silo. Like, I didn't know that there was any drama around this in our therapy community about coaching. Yeah. So I just thought, oh man, like my clients aren't meeting DSM criteria. It's not really ethical for me to keep seeing them. What can I do? And so I'm like, well, I could do supportive listening and coaching, but it's not psychotherapy.
Right.
But again, that is also something that I think therapists may not agree with me on, that I think some therapists believe that they can do psychotherapy with someone who doesn't meet a DSM criteria. That's not a belief that I hold, but that's just why I decided to open up to coaching. And so I meet with people for supportive counseling, lowercase c, across the world, really.
Yeah.
When they don't meet a DSM criteria, and when I've determined through assessment that they could not more so benefit from a psychotherapy relationship. Yeah. So the coaching relationship is much more present focused, short-term goal oriented. We're not looking at long-term childhood issues. And so I've been able to navigate it just fine. Most of the time people transition from my therapy practice into my coaching practice. And I consider it like sort of a graduation of sorts. I rarely have, so if people in my coaching practice, I start to see that they're developing symptoms that are mental health symptoms, I will help them find a therapist in their area.
Yeah. I mean, you're not going to get any blowback from me on that. I think, just from a business perspective, there's so many doors that are opened if you kind of start to see things through that lens. And you can see, you can help people who don't live in your state necessarily. So you don't have to be constrained by that. And as therapists, I think we have some really good coaching skills that are already there.
Yeah.
And sometimes get held back even potentially by being in that therapist role.
Totally agreed. Yeah. Yes. And I think I've had great experiences with non-therapist coaches too.
Yeah, me too.
So, I might be a bit of an outlier there, but I think the coaching community is amazing. I love that they want to help people. I would, hope they would never attempt to do therapy without a license. And I've never seen that in my own circle. Yeah. I also, just for therapists, you just have to call it like it is. If you're coaching a client and they really need therapy, you have to just
Yeah.
It,
100%.
it has to be a referral, and there
Yeah.
can't be any gray area there.
Yeah.
But when people are abiding by the scope of their license, I think it's great.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And as long as one of the things that you did that I thought was really pretty smart and helps with kind of delineating those two things is you actually have two separate websites for it. So it's very clear. Here's one side of things. Here's the other side of things. But yeah, there's a lot of doors I think that can open for people that way.
So again, this kind of brings us full circle, because when I had someone out of state who contacted me, I did an assessment with them, and I was like, oh, you don't need a therapist, really. I think you need like a friend or a coach or something else, but you don't need psychotherapy.
Yeah.
And she said, well, could you just do counseling, coaching with me? And I said, well, yeah, I guess. And so I made a coaching form, or, whatever, consent form for coaching.
Yeah.
And again, going back to my team, I just emailed legal, tax, bookkeeper, and said, hey, just want you to know, I'm seeing a coaching client. Here's my consent form. Lawyer writes back right away. Consent form's perfect, but per California regulations, you have to have two separate sites.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, there you go. I mean, that's the beauty of having that infrastructure already set up, that's already there for you. And it's like, you can access that at any time. There's growing pains that go with that and setting that up in the first place. But it's so supportive in the long term, that's always there for you.
Even do you feel like you have that? You must, after 8 years. Do you feel like you have a team? Yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I feel like I would be sort of like floundering if I did, and honestly, I think I would feel a lot more anxious because I if something like that came up and there's a question that I don't know the answer to, what do I do? Now I know exactly. I'm like, I call this person, I email that person, and there you go.
Are you doing coaching too?
A little bit, yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, which has been great. And
awesome.
Yeah, so I definitely appreciate that process, and even just part of this podcast and, helping other therapists, these things kind of land in your lap, as you were saying, like with the person who calls you and is like, well, could you maybe do a little bit of coaching?
Yeah.
That's what's been happening to me, just with all these therapists that I know, and some even that I don't know that well, who are like, oh, well, can you help me with kind of this business side of thing and transitioning into this different part of my practice, or I want to do things a little bit differently. I just am hearing that all over the place. So I want to be able to help people with that in some way. So I feel like we could just like talk.
I know, because I want to interview you right now, but I know I can't.
Yeah. But I was just in the back of my head, I'm like, well, we got to land this plane like at some point.
All right, I'm your co-pilot. Let's land it.
Yeah. So tell me if there's something you could say to either that former version of yourself that we were talking about earlier, that place that you were at in your life, what would you want that person to know? What would you say to them now?
To act quickly on dissatisfaction. Do not sit in mud for long. When you're feeling dissatisfied, when you're feeling angsty, make a move. Make a move. It could be a move to take a shower. It could be a move to quit your job. It could be a move to whatever. But like, you have to keep moving. Yeah, you have to keep moving.
I love that. And I love the degrees too, of like everything from a shower to quitting your job.
This podcast is not
just as we were saying,
as medical or psychological treatment.
Like if you're chipping away,
in no way
sometimes
should it
even
replace treatment
the
from a
act
mental
of
health
just
professional.
doing that, it gives you the knowledge that you're progressing towards that thing that you're feeling pulled towards, and that feels better. Yeah,
100%.
Well, Kim, thank you so much. It's just been an absolute pleasure talking to you about this stuff. And I really think there is so much for hopefully other therapists to take away from this and learn from your experience. And I really wish you all the best in your continuing growth and your practice.
Me too. I love this format. I love this pathway. I'm going to recommend this to all my supervisees. This is an awesome, awesome podcast. Great format. And I'm so excited to, see your other guests.
All right, that was Dr. Cammy Froude. Her website is drcammy.com. That's Cammy. You can check out all the stuff that we talked about there. And don't forget to also check out the website for Practice Growth, which is growingthepractice.com. I look forward to talking with you all again soon. And until next time, keep on growing.